You followed up the news about the troops withdrawal from 5 bases from Afghanistan. Pentagon confirmed, but Afghan presidential office didn't comment about it so far. But General McKenzie met with Mr. Ghani and assured with the U.S. Commitment to Afghanistan. What is your initial thoughts about this? Do you think it's the right time to pull the troops from Afghanistan?
No, I don't. I think the problem that the U.S. finds itself in is it is committed to a downsizing of troops as part of the agreement earlier this year between the U.S. government and the Taliban. But at this point, we have had no serious intra-Afghan talks. There's been no progress on the peace negotiations. So the U.S. has gone down, and it's going down to about 8,600 forces. And the Taliban has provided really no concessions. In fact, if anything, they've just stepped up attacks, including this week against Afghan targets, Afghan government targets. So the U.S. is decreasing its force presence, and the Taliban has really done nothing as part of that.
Yeah, that was part of my next question. The Taliban has stepped up in the violence for the past few days and also across Afghanistan, including Kabul. There was a roadside bomb yesterday. But Ambassador Khalilzad tweeted that they are on 135th day of negotiation and they are implementing part of this peace process, including reduce of forces and pulling troops from Afghanistan. And as you say that, do you think it is going to the right way and Taliban will be committed when the troops withdraw from Afghanistan?
Well, here's the problem. At this point, we see a Taliban with support from Pakistan, as it has had since the war began. It has support, more escalated support from the Russians, including the GRU. It's had support from the Iranians. And we've seen the Taliban unwilling to really seriously talk about demobilizing its forces, disarming, reintegrating, which is a major component of most past peace talks. So a Taliban that continues to get funding from outside states and that it has no intention of disarming means to me that it wants to continue to fight, which is what it's done. It has not really targeted U.S. forces right now. It's really targeted Afghan forces. And what it looks like to me is where the Taliban is going is focused on getting U.S. and other international forces out. And once it has that, if it does get that, then it will turn its eye directly on overthrowing or trying to overthrow the Afghan government in Kabul.
Also, U.S. and you know about the story, U.S. Russia paying bounties to Taliban to target U.S. forces, which was huge for past few days or week. But Afghan forces and U.S. military forces are suggesting that Russians assisting Taliban with the arms. What is your thoughts about this bounties thing? Do you think it is like a real thing from GRU against U.S. troops and carrying on a shadow war in Afghanistan?
Well, look, I think having been involved in looking when I was in the U.S. government and now outside of the U.S. government at these issues, I would say it's important to take a step back. The biggest and most significant source of outside assistance, state-based assistance to the Taliban has been, is, and will likely continue to be Pakistan and its ISI, its Directorate of Inter-Services Intelligence. In addition, the Taliban does also get funding from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force. This includes lethal funding. So the Russian assistance needs to be put into context, but it's not new. You've had confirmed Russian assistance, small amounts of assistance, money, intelligence, small arms, since at least 2016. It would be an escalation if there was information that the GRU provided bounties or essentially money to Taliban as incentives to target U.S. and other forces. But I think the big picture is there's a lot of state support to the Taliban, and then the Russians have been providing assistance to the Taliban now for about 4 years, and that shouldn't be lost sight of in whether or not the GRU actually paid bounties. They've been aiding the Taliban. That in and of itself is a big story.
Did you follow on the latest hearing on Afghanistan and these Russia bounties targeting U.S. troops at Congress and Capitol Hill? But there are still lawmakers. They're calling for tougher policies against Russia, what they have done with this. What is your thoughts about this hearing and these lawmakers, which way they are going?
Well, I think here's the challenge. There are a number of both Republicans and Democrats that support a tougher line towards the Russians. The Russians have expanded their presence not just in Afghanistan, but primarily through special operations forces, intelligence units, and also private military corporations like the Wagner Group. The Russians have expanded their presence in South Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, Africa. They've got a presence in places like the Central African Republic, Venezuela. So there's a lot of support among both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats, to push back harder against the Russians. The challenge right now is the U.S. president does not appear to be particularly enthused about pushing back against Putin. So while we may have support among members of Congress, it doesn't appear to be a top priority of the White House at the moment.
Also, there was a piece of news that Mark Milley and also Secretary Esper, they're saying that Russia may assist the Taliban with the arms. But there's a quote, Mark Milley says that there's a distinction between assisting and directing Taliban to target US forces. What's your thoughts about these high-profile people still trying to they say that Russia didn't pay Taliban or something, they're not targeting US forces?
Well, there are various components of this intelligence that began to surface in 2019 and continued through 2020. The February 27th, 2020 presidential daily brief that was given to President Trump did indicate that there were some different views among the U.S. intelligence community about the type of assistance, how much Russia actually directed the Taliban to conduct attacks. I mean, I would say at this point, it's not entirely clear, in part because the intelligence has not been made public. But I think what we can say are two things. One is that the Russians have provided assistance and that U.S. intelligence, Afghan intelligence, NATO intelligence, so from a range of NATO countries like the British, have verified that the Russians have provided intelligence and other support to the Taliban. So we know that, including lethal assistance. The question is to what degree and if the GRU directed Taliban forces to kill U.S. or other international forces, or whether they simply paid bounties after the killing and they wanted verification of it, or whether they were simply just providing money for broader Taliban activity. That information has not been yet been made public. So it's a little difficult on the outside to disentangle what's true and what's not.
Last question. I know you're the expert on counterinsurgency, and in Afghanistan is not only Taliban. So do you think when the US troops pull out, there are a lot of insurgents active in Afghanistan, and defense strategy will kind of like change or something? US defense strategy for Afghanistan was going to be the same?
Well, I think there certainly are a lot of insurgent militant groups operating in Afghanistan. The Afghan-Pakistan border region has long been a porous border for everything from the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan to the various anti-Indian groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, as well as to a range of organizations that have had sanctuary in Pakistan, like the Haqqani Network. So I fully expect if the U.S. were to withdraw its forces, that important components of Afghanistan would increase as a sanctuary for militant groups with a focus on Afghanistan, the broader region, and potentially internationally. I think if the U.S. did pull out its combat forces, there would almost certainly continue to be some military assistance, including funding to the Afghan National Security Forces, including the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police Forces, as well as potentially to local militia forces. But it's not the same as engaging in combat operations and targeting groups like the Taliban on your own. So I think having a U.S. withdrawal would have a serious impact on the state of the war.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Mr. Jones, for your time. I appreciate it. It's fantastic.